Hi, I'm Larry, and welcome to my studio. I've been a teacher with the Torrance Cultural Arts Center for about 15 years now. And over the course of years, I've been teaching acrylics, watercolor, and past several years, pastel. When we got the word that our classes have been canceled, my students were wondering what they were going to do with themselves. And I got some worried emails about classes and what they were going to do and how they missed the classes. And so I had to come up with some way to keep connected with my students and hopefully find some new ones. And this was something I wanted to try and do, which was to create some videos for my students. So welcome to my studio, and let's get started. This is going to be a watercolor project. So here's my watercolor palette, my brushes. Now I use angle brushes, but you can use any kind of brush that you feel comfortable with. I have more brushes, my water, my spray bottles back there someplace. I have my project. Also, I want to point out what I use to help me with my watercolors, and that's to incline my project so that I can let gravity help me. Back here I've got 2 pieces of wood that I found in my garage. I've got, this is like a 1.5 inch, 2 inch piece of wood here. This is a 4 inch block, and I use them when I'm painting so that I can have gravity help me. I can put it up either on the 2 inch block or the 4 inch block, and that will let the paint flow faster. The higher up the back part of your support is, the better gravity works for you. The support that I'm using, this is a plastic support. You can get them at like Home Depot or Lowe's or someplace where they have, this is an acrylic board, and it's sturdy. I've had these probably for 15-20 years. They are virtually indestructible, you know, as long as you don't jump up and down on them. But they're solid, they don't bend, and they're light, so you can do a lot. These are the ones I use the most. Also, up here I have my OT light. It's always good to have a light that has a full spectrum. Because that way you can see your colors the way they're supposed to be. So don't forget lighting when you're setting up to paint. As I said, this is going to be a watercolor project. This is my photo that I took up at the South Coast Botanical Gardens. It's called a Matahia poppy. They're huge, and I love them, but they're very invasive. But I thought that we would do this because I know a lot of my students have really enjoyed doing this project over the years. So the first thing you need to do is to get a design or a drawing. Use the photograph only as reference. Don't try to paint every last single thing that you see in here. To me, the thing that is important is the flower and the stems here. And that's really the only part of this photograph that I'm going to be using. So here's my drawing, which I did freehand. At times when I'm doing things for class, I will just take and copy my photograph, or at least the parts that I want. But for this, I did this freehand. If you don't draw, You have nothing but time on your hands right now. So find some drawing videos or some books and practice your drawing. The better you draw, the better painter you will be. I didn't believe it either, but it's true. So once I had my drawing on paper, now this is just paper out of the computer. You can use drawing paper or whatever. What you don't want to do is to draw on your watercolor paper, at least not too much. If it's something simple, that's okay. If it's something you do a lot of erasing on, no, because you will damage the paper and you will not be happy with the results. So always try to use something else to draw your design on. Now once you have your design on your paper, you have to get it on well, at least on your drawing paper or typing. You have to get it onto your watercolor paper. So what I do is I usually use this. It's called graphite paper. Similar to carbon paper, but you don't want to use carbon paper. Carbon paper is oily and you'll ruin your watercolor paper. So get non-waxy graphite paper for this. Then you just slide it under, go over the lines of your drawing, get everything copied. You can check by looking underneath and making sure you've got all your lines. And then once that's done, you will have your drawing on your paper. Now the graphite paper can be very messy if you lean too hard on it, like I've done here. So since it is just graphite paper, you can erase it. You may want to go over your lines again if they're a little bit faint, like I started to do here. I've used that graphite paper many times. I will do the rest of that off camera. Trying to locate my eraser. This will work. Let's see, this just erases off. You want to use the white erasers because they don't have dyes in them, and they also do not have any abrasives in them, and they won't damage your paper. But again, do not scrub really hard. You just want to get the smudges off or any lines you don't want, but you still have to protect that paper. So let me break here a second and finish putting my lines in, and then we'll get started painting. Okay, you can see that I've emphasized the lines of my drawing after I transferred it with the graphite paper. Now I was using a 3B drawing pencil. B stands for black. The higher the number, the softer the lead, so the darker the result you will get with the pencil. Normally I would use a number 2B for myself because it's dark enough that I can see it when I'm working. But for teaching purposes, I usually use a 3B so that my students can see what I'm doing. So that's just in case you will see pencil lines at the end of this. I'm not worried about them in any case. So the first thing I'm going to do is something not everybody is going to want to do, and that is I'm going to splatter my painting. I enjoy doing this, and since this is the time we need to find as much joy in our lives as we can, I'm going to splatter this. Now I'm going to splatter everything, the flower, the leaves, the background, everything. But if you don't want to, first off, you do not have to splatter. That's totally optional. Second, if you want to splatter but you don't want to get it all over your flowers and or your leaves, you can use something like this. This is Peebo drawing gum, or any of the other types of masking fluids. I'm not necessarily recommending this. I just use it because it dries blue and people can see it when it's dried. I'm not going to use it this time, but it is an option for those of you who do not want to get your flower splattered. So first thing I'm going to do, these are my angle brushes. This is my 3/4 inch angle brush. Like I said, I use these for everything. And first thing I'm going to do is I want to splatter my paper. Now the reason I'm going to splatter this with water is because wherever the paint hits, the paint will run. I have it up on the 4-inch block because I really do want some action from my paint. And that's it. I just splattered it with water. Now I'm going to come to my palette, which you can't see, it's off camera, but I'm going to pick up some ultramarine blue and wet it down pretty good with water so that it will come off my brush. And I'm just going to splatter. Kind of want a lot of the splatter to be out towards the edges of this, because some of that is going to show at the end. Now I'm going to take some other colors. I'm going to pick up some yellow. Make sure you rinse your brush off. I probably should have started with the yellow rather than the blue, because now I get green, but that's okay. I'm not worried about it. Pick up my yellow, get it good and soupy, and start splattering some of that around. The blue is still wet, and I still have that just plain water that I threw on there. So the yellow is going to be mixing with any wet stuff it finds. Rinse my brush, pick up some orange. This is just cadmium orange. If you would like to know what colors I'm using, or get a copy of the drawing or the reference photo that I'm working from, you can go to my blog spot, and there will be links and there will be things in the sidebar. You might want to check those out. There's some information. If I get more information, I will try to update that. I've been doing the blogs for several years now, so if you want to find some other things to paint, it's not a video, but I do have some fairly detailed instructions to accompany the projects that we've worked on in class. Next I'm going to pick up some red, and this is my Naphthol red. Naphthol can also be called Winsor red if it's a Winsor Newton color, or Grumbacher red. Sometimes they give it their own name. Why, I don't know, but they do. And last, I'm going to put on this is some sap green. Just splatter some of that in there. And now I have to let it dry. So Fortunately for you, I don't need to make you wait that long. I'm just going to turn off the camera for a few minutes and let this dry. You may want to also lay it flat if you like what you have. If you see drips, you can stand it up and make the drips move, or just let it dry as is. Be back in a flash. Be back in a flash. Okay, I've let it dry. Yes, I could have used a hair dryer, but I'd still be editing that out. It's up to you. I like to let the watercolor work for as long as it can. You can see where in places where it met other paint or it met some of those water droplets that it has spread out and done some interesting things. You will also notice that it is dried lighter. That's just the nature of watercolor. Watercolor dries lighter, acrylics dry darker, and oils are about the same. So when you're working with a different media, you have to remember that. Now, what I'm going to do is called negative painting. And that's not everybody getting all upset and crying and whining. No, that's just being negative, and we don't need that right now. Negative painting is when you paint everything but the thing that you're trying to bring out. For this instance, it's going to be the flower. The flower is the main thing. So I'm going to start on the background. Now I'm going to be using this is my 3/4 inch brush again, and I try to use the biggest brush that I feel comfortable with before I start getting down into the smaller ones, because smaller brushes make you feel confined. So I try to find a brush that is big to start out with. I've got a lot of area to cover, and I don't want to get all cramped up. I'm going to keep a paper towel in my hand, because once I've rinsed off my brush, I want to dry it off. You want your brush damp, but not soaking wet. For the background here, I want kind of a dark green color. I'm going to go down into, I'll go back into the sap green that I started with before. And this time I'm going to add a little bit of my ultramarine blue to it. Now you pick colors that you want to use. You can use any colors you want. I just want to create a simple background for this demo, but don't let me stop you. If you want to do something else, please feel free to do it. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to use this color to kind of help cut and shape my petals. Down here is basically leaves in the picture anyway. And by the way, my picture is up here where I can see it. I've got it pinned to my desk here so that I can look at it and know what I'm doing. Don't think that your memory is going to help you in this. Even though I've painted this many times, or ones similar to it, I want reference material out there so that if I need it, I can look up and it's right there. So I paint that much. Now, is that the final thing I'm going to do on this? Probably not. But I'm going to start with that. If I need it darker, I will come back in and put another layer down. While this is still wet, I've rinsed my brush, I've dried it off so that it's just damp, and I'm going to take that damp brush and I'm going to put it at the base of that color that I just painted, and I'm going to use that damp brush to kind of soften the bottom edge of this and bleed out the color. The whole brush is on the paper. And I'm just going to pull that color out and let it just kind of fade into that background. Every time I rinse my brush, I run it across my paper towel to dry it. Now I don't want to keep going over this background because it will stir up the paint. But for now, I'm just going to go over a little bit and so that I have a soft edge down here. Do this in sections. Paint another section. I do try to keep my whole brush on the paper where I can. If I get into a small area, I will turn it up on its point. That's what I love about these angled brushes. I've just rinsed my brush, come back, the whole brush is on the paper, and I'm just going to bleed that out. The tip of the brush is just touching that previous brush stroke, and you see how it's making a nice graded wash. I'm going to come up, I'm going to try to stay out of the painting and do up here. A lot of this is going to be repetitive, so I will cut here in a little bit to finish this off so you don't have to watch me do all of this. But I do want you to see enough of this so that you can see where I'm going with it. I'm basically going to ignore that splattering that I did. And that just becomes part of the background, just part of the paper. Rinse my brush, dry it off, and come here and just go along the bottom with my damp brush. Can pull it up. Another thing you can do with watercolor, if it's getting uncomfortable the way your hand is, turn it upside down. Nobody's gonna fault you for that. You don't have to just keep it in one position. I'm just mixing up some more color, which is my sap green and my ultramarine blue. Now I don't care if it's the same exact color. That's not important. Actually, things look better if you have a little bit of variety. I'm going to be negative painting in between the little parts of the head of this flower here. Pull my color out. I can use that tip to get into the little crevices. And I'm sorry if my head gets in the way. I'm still figuring this out. Do a little bit of that. Pull the color out a bit. Rinse my brush. Come back in. And right along the bottom of this, just bleed it out. Let it go into nothing. My brush is a little bit damper here. Okay, I'm going to break away and I'm going to finish the rest of this flower and then I'll be right back.